Thanks for coming tonight. Great turnout. Wanted to take a minute to thank my friend Piero for inviting me, but for more importantly, for growing this Leonardo experience. Been to a lot of these, and they're always pretty terrific. Also wanted to thank the Minerva Foundation, and I did not know that UC Berkeley Extension was hosting this. I got 90% of my photographic education at UC Berkeley Extension in San Francisco. So I have a very special place in my heart for that institution. If I were to wish for anything, I should not wish for wealth and power, but for the passionate sense of what might be. For the eye, which ever young and ardent sees the possible. Pleasure disappoints, possibility never. And what wine is so sparkling, what so fragrant, what so intoxicating as possibility? Kierkegaard may have written it, but this is the story of my life. Ever growing, ever dreaming, living into the possibilities of being alive. I've been very lucky in my life to spend time with some truly extraordinary people in extraordinary locations. From my first job in college working for Charlie Reich, who was the author of the groundbreaking book, The Greening of America. Those of you old enough remember that book. It was one of the first books that took a positive look at what our generation, the changes that went on here and out in the plaza, what it meant for the country and for our culture. More recently, working with Berkeley's own Robert Hass, who was kind enough to write the introduction to my third book. From my time with scientists at the Santa Fe Institute to the last 3 years at Jasper Ridge, I have been utterly inspired and profoundly moved by the creativity that I have been able to see in all people. For me, creativity is original thinking made useful by a larger community. In science, we have the tradition of the scientific method, where the work product is critically reviewed, published, and criticized or applauded for all to see. In the fine arts, we have nothing. This is a good thing for people like me. And I think it's a true benefit for all artists that we're able to express ourselves and explore the boundaries of our medium. Because at the end of the day, if you're not willing to be totally, absolutely wrong, you will never produce anything original. That is what stops most of us in original thinking and action. And it's a solitary challenge of people like me, working artists, to explore the boundaries and bring back their discoveries, including their failures, to share with the community at large. My journey began in 1973 when a friend settled a debt that he had with me by giving me a camera that I did not want. But I was moving off to Colorado, and it was clear that if I didn't take the camera, I wasn't going to get anything. So I ended up with a camera. Never had one before, was not interested in photography, and was visiting friends in the Wasatch Mountains in Utah. And on my first roll of film, I looked through it and beheld this scene. And in that moment out of time, I saw the totality of not just my life, but of life writ large as I made this photograph. And that moment of transcendence awakened something that's never been extinguished in my life. In being present to the beauty, balance, and harmony of that tableau, I gave my heart to life and eventually would dedicate it to the preservation of the biosphere through my work in the arts. Landscape photography was my first love. From 1973 to 1999, it was my principal means of creative expression. It was my desire to make images that, for want of a better word, shoehorned all of life into a given image. And this is an example of what I regarded as an early success in the early 1980s. This is Archilarius Ranch in the Eastern Sierra. And in this image, at the time I made it, I saw earth, air, water, joy and sorrow, life and death, all of it, there for me to grab a hold of and share with others. Like many other well-educated men of my generation, once I got out of college, I knew I had to fix the world. And the first place I attempted to do that was in working with the Hunger Project and the Breakthrough Foundation, working with kids that were incarcerated at the California Youth Authority. So these were kids younger than the age of 18, many of whom had taken one or more lives, done unspeakable things. Young men and women who are trying to rescue themselves and re-enter society. It was an extraordinary time. It's one of the images from the book of the zip line they participated in. In the early 1980s, I was newly married. I joined a commercial studio in San Francisco, south of Market, and life was good. Over time, the joy that I found in the simple making of a photograph started to disappear, and I became deeply concerned because it's pretty much all I'd ever done with my life. And my mentor at the time told me, he said, I can see what the problem is. The only time you make photographs now is to make money, and that's not why you started this. So I returned to making photographs for the joy of it, and spent 10 years on the Crystal Springs watershed, the 25,000 acres that borders Interstate 280 as you drive the peninsula. That resulted in this book in 1995, The Unseen Peninsula. So it was an extraordinary time. I spent thousands of hours, made over 8,000 exposures, and had 45 portfolio pieces to show for it when it was published. Unfortunately, before the release party, my family's life changed profoundly when we lost my wife's mother, Peggy, and a few months later, I lost my mother, and a few months after that, we lost my younger sister, so we lost 3 members of our family over a period of about 18 months. This was our first taste of mortality, and it was something that changed the way I see the world. During my sister's decline, I was given a residency at the Jurassic Resident Artist Program, and given my desire to generate my own creativity and to think newly about things, I decided to spend my time there using a miniature camera and film that is blind to visible light, but is very sensitive to heat radiation. So this was a new venture, and I was delighted with the results. This piece, Jurassic Days End, 1996. Fortunately, the results were compelling for others as well, so much so that I assembled a team of volunteers, and we published the book as 18 Days in June to raise money for the Jurassic Artist Program's endowment. So at this point, I had labored throughout my life in photography, trying to make present that ineffable quality of transcendence. Those moments where the wall between you as the observer and that which you observe disappear, and you discover that you and it are one and the same. A little bit of Indra's net, if you will, that you're connected to everything around you. I had started by photographing people, because I thought that's where transformation lies, is in the lives of these young men and women faced with such hardship. I then moved to the landscape. And at this point, I was thinking, am I ever going to generate anything that can create that experience? So here I am, recording heat signatures, moving farther and farther and farther away from what you and I would call objective reality. All of that in an effort to create imagery that was mine, that was truly original. And over time, I think I got closer and closer to the mystery, but I still felt a million miles away. And what I realized is that there's something profoundly, our very fundamental humanity is coming into play. Human beings don't like questions for which there is no answer. The eyes don't like to see things that they can't immediately say, that's a tree, that's a person, that's a shipyard, whatever it happens to be. So I realized I had to move beyond the traditions of photography. After I came back from supervising the Jurassic book, I was camped late one night in the Arizona desert, and I saw a whole new possibility for my medium. The idea of approaching pieces of film the same way a painter would approach a canvas. Free from traditional tools and free to discover what that approach might reveal to me. This was the first such image that was successful in that quest. This is Alstroemeria, made without cameras, lenses, or computers. So now, I'm in a new phase of my creative life, and now it is my desire to create art that is free of everything except that which made it. So this is from the portfolio Through the Green Fuse, whose title was derived from the eponymous poem by Dylan Thomas. And this marked my initial foray into the world of energetic photograms. After 2 years of work in building the equipment and creating the technique, I used about 3,000 sheets of film. I had 25 finished images. So this is a process in which if you have a problem with being wrong, you will not survive. Because 99% of the time, you have spent your time and your money. The film's about $45 a sheet. So you go through 3,000 sheets of film, you end up with 25 images. There's still jokes in the family about Rob here and his mental stability. Here it is. Cordaderia celoana, better known as pampas grass. Eucalyptus polyanthemus. Lilium. And Xanthodecia ethiopica, better known as the calla lily. As the result of the success of the Green Fuse portfolio and the patronage of our collectors, Bill and Sonia Davidow, I was invited to move to Santa Fe from 2003 to 2006 and begin work there as an artist in residence. That resulted in the portfolio Sangre de Cristo, which to this day is the most productive 3 years I have ever enjoyed in my lifetime. The work is inspired by the flora and the landscape of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northern New Mexico. Golden columbine, Hopi dye sunflower. This was given to me on the Hopi Reservation. This is the plant that gives them the seeds from which they extract their red pigments for their weavings and tapestries. The Santa Fe Institute is known throughout the world for its research and complexity studies. So this was a bit of a self-portrait of the energy there at the facility. This Eryngium matrix, 3 aspen leaves. Now, I want you to know I recognize that many of you are probably curious about how I make these images. And it's certainly a valid question, but I've got to tell you, it's a little like eating the menu instead of the meal. So I'd like you to enjoy the meal. We'll talk about the menu in a minute. Between trips to Santa Fe, I continued my work at home, collecting plants from the historic Rancho Corral de Tierra. This is the 5,000 acres that constitutes Montera Mountain and surrounds my home town of Montera. And it's mostly wildland, arroyo willow, Mitch's roses from my garden, parrot tulip, white clematis. So as a human being, and as somebody who was using weeks of time and 99 sheets of film for every one that ended up being published, you might well imagine that I wanted to figure out a way to exert greater control over this process, not listening to my own wisdom, shall we say. So I started using black and white film the way we would use Polaroid in a commercial studio, where you get the bottle of wine and the grapes set up, and you take a Polaroid of it, and the client looks and says, yes, that's our ad there. Then you put the film in and commit it to film. I tried that several times with this, forgetting that every Polaroid is wrapped in tinfoil, which is electrically conductive. So when you put a Polaroid on an 80,000 volt charged plate, you end up with fireworks. So I started using my old friend, black and white film, to create this collection called Both Sides Now, from the Joni Mitchell tune. This is A Gift Returned. Maple Duet. And by the way, I make all my own prints, I process all my own film. I'm an old world, non-digital, web process, darkroom guy. These prints, this particular one's 40 by 50 inches. And there aren't but a dozen or so photographers left in this country that still make their own silver prints in that size. It's like the imaging process, it's a colossal challenge, but a very satisfying one. Citrus number 13. And Fiddleheads. In October of 2009, as a member of Semperviren's Fund's advisory board, I was invited to hike Stanford University's Jasper Ridge with its director, Philippe Cohen. In 2007, I was stricken with Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and for the last 5 years have been largely unable to work. I was intrigued by hearing our previous speaker talking about what happens to creative people when they have degenerative brain disease, as I have now had for several years. This work is what has kept me alive and what's kept me going. So during that time, as I say, I was unable to work for the first few years, but I've now gotten back to my imaging, and these are some of the pieces that are from this as yet unpublished portfolio. Woodland Forest Floor. Green Mandala. So, let's now take a minute and talk about the process. How are we doing here? We've got a couple minutes left. Great. So, the experience of making these images is as different as anything possibly can be from traditional photography. The best analogy is from the domain of music. Black and white photography is an extremely structured practice. It's like classical music. You don't get to swing off if you're part of a symphony and do your own thing. Black and white photography is like that. The materials won't respond if you don't work within the parameters you're given. This work is improvisational jazz. You're working in total darkness. You're working with self-invented tools. There's no meters. There's no way to control it. So it's very